work after work.
So we are awesome. So we are live now. So
Awesome.
uh, hi everyone. I'm really excited to host Brandon Pachuca. He's currently urban data analyst and web developer at KPF. I met Brandon in AC Tech Hackathon last year in October, where I saw his amazing work, and then we connected over LinkedIn. And he has been doing amazing work in the AEC Tech community. I have been following his work, and I'm really excited, and I'm looking forward to the presentation today. Thanks a lot, Brandon, for your time to do this.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk, any day you get to talk about code within AEC, I think is a good day.
So yeah, if you can briefly share your journey till date and how you got into the coding part, that would be awesome.
Sure. So my background is in architecture and urban planning from the University of New Mexico. Shortly after graduating, before I even had a chance to look at like an architectural job or really like a master's of architecture, I started working for a startup called Resilient Solutions 21, and I was the third hire. And it was only four of us at the time, and I didn't know any code necessarily. I coded a little bit in Maya, in like the Maya embedded language or the MEL, and a little bit of Python. Uh, but it was really fun because the first language I ever learned in programming was JavaScript, specifically D3, which I now know teaches you some really bad habits in JavaScript, but that was the first language I ever learned. So at that company, we focused on creating data visualizations for public and private companies who are wrangling with very large data problems. Oftentimes we worked with the national laboratories back home in New Mexico, but there was Sandia National Laboratories and Los Alamos National Laboratories. And what we found is that oftentimes that these engineers would have great insights into how cities should handle and respond to not only just climate change, but potential like natural disasters. And those insights oftentimes never really found their way to the decision makers because like the information they were trying to convey was a little bit too complex oftentimes, and those decision makers have a very small window to make a decision and deploy resources, whatever it is. So at that point, it was just like a really great opportunity to learn how to make intuitive UI and code that, to take that data and create those dashboards for them to know what happens if a hurricane hits the East Coast. Like, what are our opportunities to prepare for that? And so at that job, I worked there for a number of years. And then I started getting more interested, not just in coding, because at RS21, I learned JavaScript, I learned Python, I learned a little bit of .NET, and I learned like all the web application architectures. And I became more interested in data science. And I eventually found myself applying for data science master's programs. And I eventually found my way to the NYU Center for Urban Science and Progress here in New York. And when I got accepted, I was looking for a job, and I found the KPF UI team, which has been a great experience to work full time and go to school at night. Even though it's like very stressful at times, it allows me to take what I learned at school and apply it directly to my job during the day. So it's been like, I found like the application use of data science. So that's really where I found my passion, is not just on the programming technology, which I love, and I'm a nerd for especially JavaScript libraries. I'm a nerd for, and but it's really like I want to find that area of like architectural technology and eventually policy, because like while in architecture, when we go to a site, the site is already decided what you can and cannot do based on zoning regulations and all these other laws. Like a good example is, I believe it's Singapore, is that any green space that you build on, you have to replace. So if you build on any green park, you have to replace that green park, and that's a city policy. And I think as we're going towards combating climate change within the architectural industry, I think these are great opportunities to use data to inform what those future policies might be. So technology and data science, I want to combine those all, and UI, UX, and all these other cool technologies to try to inform like better design.
That's super interesting, like how you have taken like multidisciplinary approach. And like, do you have like some role model or someone who has follow similar path? Because it's rare to find people doing like work at this intersection.
Sure. So actually, at my last occupation at RS21, my CTO, my then CTO Cameron Baumgartner, he was creating his own Masters of Architecture at the University of New Mexico. So he essentially created his own Masters of Architecture within the program to try to merge these pieces together. And now, that was years ago. And now we're seeing these programs come out like crazy, right? All across the United States. And I think it's interesting being in this space now because it's a niche space to be in. As we know, like, we all see each other at every AEC Tech. Uh, and I think as far as like role models, it's almost like everyone within the field is doing such incredible work that like it makes me want to just push that much harder and try to find ways to, like, all right, how can I take this technology and push it farther? Because like everyone else is doing really cool work.
Got it. So I think we have some awesome coding work lined up, so I won't take much of the time and will hand over the virtual stage to you.
Sure. Yeah, this should be exciting. So today I have lined up is I'm a huge Vue developer, within the major, what I would say the major three frameworks in JavaScript for front end development. It's Angular, React, and Vue. A lot of applications are built on an old version of Angular, and that's what I started my journey on, Angular 1.2. And once I transitioned away from that, I became a Vue developer. And so I find myself within the space of urban data analytics, creating many virtual data maps, like interactive map visualizations. So I just wanted to walk through what it means to like take the Vue framework, add a Mapbox integration to it, and then visualize some data. So I'll walk through the code of what Vue is and like why I think it's a great framework. I know most of the industry in general is on React or on a very old version of Angular. So I'm a huge fan of Vue. So I'll be showing Vue, Mapbox, and some data visualization. I'll go into the code there. It's cool. So I can go ahead and share my screen, and I'll start with what we're going to create, and I'll go into the technologies that we're going to see here. So this is a template I made, and what I mean by template is that whenever I need to create a view or I need to create an interactive map visualization, I copy this template down and I basically have a starting place. So I wanted to show what that looks like for where I start. This in particular is just visualizing, and this is in New York City. So this is, you can see here, we're in New York. We can zoom in here, and this is the Lower East Side. And I just clipped some tree data from the NYC Open Street Census. So this is the entire data set. I didn't push the entire thing because it was way too big for GitHub. So I clipped it just to a small area in GIS. And each one of these dots is sized by the diameter of the tree. So I just took a very basic example, and I'll go into like how that all works in the code. And then we can maybe go into some Q&A. So all these points are geolocated by latitude, longitude. And then with Mapbox, they offer some really great tools to do it very quickly and create interactive visualization that you can then deploy to a web address or to a cloud infrastructure. So, and I'll be sharing this after the live stream here, is that I created a public repo called Vue Mapbox template. And here, the only prerequisites to start up this visualization is Node.js. I just need to move the Zoom tools. So Node.js is a Node package manager and allows us to download all the packages. Thinking Grasshopper, it's like food for Rhino, but for JavaScript. So it allows us to get all those packages that we need for our visualizations or whatever our JavaScript library we're building. I'm also using the Vue CLI. I know like Angular has their own CLI and React has their own CLI. The really cool things about these CLIs, it allows you to start projects very quickly. And are you able to see this terminal window? Cool. So I'm on my desktop, or I'll change my directory to my desktop. And what I'll do here is, using the Vue CLI, I'll create an app. And this is very congruent with what we're going to see in React and Angular, is that it asks me, what do you want to create? So I remember like years ago, is that when you had to create a Webpack app, it was a lot of work. Like you had to get all the dependencies yourself, you had to put it together, you had to create your own gulp file or whatever you're using to manage all that. And for this, just for this demonstration, I'll just use the default settings. So This right here is creating all the application that we need. And so once it's done creating it, you basically have an application ready to go out the box, and you can start working with it and creating your own web pages. It just is a really cool tool that for anyone who's getting started on JavaScript or starting on web development, I would highly suggest starting with a CLI, whatever you're using. I will always advocate for Vue, but if you're using React and Angular, they both have very similar CLI. So there, I changed my directory into the app, and I clicked on app serve. So if I copy this and go into my web browser to localhost 81, I just created an app in 2 lines of code in the terminal. So I have an app that's already running on localhost, and this is just the default settings they have. You'll see in the template that I created, it's very similar to this. I just took the template and added Mapbox and interactive visualization part. So it's just very cool to see that like this technology has come so far to start a web app that already has a framework. It already has like SCSS integrations into it, so you can do all your styling very easily. And so yeah, I'll go ahead and dive into the code here. So here we're going to be using VS Code. The only other prerequisites for this demonstration is going to be a Mapbox account, because Mapbox, what it allows you to do is to pull their map tiles. And their Mapbox is a really great tool because it offers, I think it's like 250,000 map pulls per month for free. And after that, there's a small price for the additional map pulls, but they offer so many integrations now, from traffic data to the map tiles themselves, that similar map tiles that we all see on Google Maps. They have some really great integrations. And the best part is that they have really great documentation of how to use their tools for Mapbox-GL, which is what we're going to be using here. So once you create an account, you'll be given an API key similar to this, and you'll be able to create your own map styles. You can create so many different map styles, which is really cool by default, and have styled maps ready for deployment into your web application. So with that, I'll go ahead and start diving into the code. So what we're going to see here is I'll start with the main injection point, is the app view. So this is where the application basically starts. So this div right here, where we're seeing the app, this router view is essentially saying, all right, go into the router, and in that router, what are we going to find? If I go into my router folder here that's got created by the Vue CLI, I'm saying, all right, let's go ahead and grab this map view. And that view is in my map view folder. And saying whenever someone goes to the default home path, let's go ahead and serve up the map.view page. And if you're not familiar, I guess I probably should back up just a little bit, is that the reason I like Vue so much is it offers these really fantastic hooks. And what I mean by hooks is this is the lifeblood of Vue, is that once a Vue instance starts, it has these lifecycle hooks of how data is ingested by the browser when it's rendering data onto the screen. And what that means is that like before the data is even created to the screen, you can do manipulations to it. Once the instance is available within the DOM of the browser, you can do more manipulations to it. So it offers these really great injection points, what they call lifecycle hooks, for you to manipulate the data, change the DOM, do your styling, do your ingestions, all in ways that are natively enabled by the Vue instance. So you'll see these within my code. You'll see a created hook. You'll see, and in this case, I use the mounted hook a lot. The main difference, and this took me a while to figure out for myself, is created means that like nothing has been rendered to the screen yet. So when you start your application and you're running your server, created means that the Vue instance exists, but like nothing has been rendered to the screen. So you can still do manipulations before any pixel has color, before any pixel gets set. Mounted means that now the Vue instance is enabled in the browser, it is running, and the DOM is already set up. So all your pieces of your DOM manipulations that are available for you are there for you to manipulate. The ones that I use quite often is before destroy and destroyed. And what that means is that before I change to a different route, or before I go from one page to another page, I can destroy everything that was on that previous page. And the reason we do that is it allows us to save on memory within the browser. So as you're changing between pages, I can destroy all my other variables so it doesn't just stay in the user's browser. In some cases, you want to keep all those pieces there because they're going to be going back and forth, back and forth. like a good example of that is like when you're going onto Amazon, right? You're going between your cart and the shopping, and the cart and the shopping. And I think that interaction has come a long way. And the beautiful thing about Vue is like once you go to a website in Vue, you're never actually going to a new page. And what that means is like everything's opened in the book, and what's changing, you're not like turning the page to a new page in the book. It's staying on the same page and loading in a different template in its place. And that's the reason you'll see references within the Vue framework as this thing called a template, is that the user is never changing the page. It's just sliding in a new template without having to load any of the background. And that background is the overhead that within the JavaScript development that we've had to deal with for so long, is like there's so much overhead in just loading a page. In this case, when I load my map, it's loaded in once. I save the variables into the cache, and whenever the user goes back to it, it's already saved there for them. So I'm just injecting new data into the visualization, into the template. So
I have a question.
Sure.
So for example, when you say like the new pages are sliding in, so I'm envisioning like what if there is a button, and if I click a button, there is, let's say, some trigger. So the button will stay there, and so do I need to create same button on each of the slide in, which, or it's like reference to other slide ins?
Sure. So a good way to envision that is that, let's say on this Vue, the Vue documentation here, if I go to introduction or if I go to template syntax, these load times are really fast because everything's already loaded into the browser, and it's just changing out the template. Like that render speed is because it's loaded into the template. And so what that means is that whenever you click on, in this case, class and style bindings, it's loaded in that template into the larger framework of that page. So you can templatize any piece of this. So you can imagine this sidebar here is a template, and it's just changing out what's inside here, right? We can see that the sidebar stays the same. Everything else within this piece here is changing. So it loads this nav bar, it loads the sidebar, it probably loads their sponsorships once, and it just loading it into a different template. And that's really the piece of Vue that I really enjoy, is that it allows me to do very quick manipulations while minimizing the amount of overhead I have in my web application, which is something that, like, as we're dealing with not just on people's desktops, but potentially mobile, it makes all the difference when everything is really snappy on the web page itself. And that's because of the template. I think React has something very similar with JSM when you're able to manipulate the DOM directly from the JavaScript. Vue tackles it slightly differently using the template syntax. And in Vue 3, there's even some new syntax that I'm still learning. So it's constantly changing and evolving to be even faster than before, which is interesting. Like the field still has places to go, which is kind of cool to think about. So on this app view, this main injection point, what we're seeing here is that I'm loading in some very basic CSS. In this case, I'm using SCSS, which allows us to write variables within our style sheets. In this case, if I want, for instance, to make this a variable in SCSS, I could say I want this like my color text, and I assign that to a variable. Now, if I write color text there, that will compile automatically. I need to add that. So this is really nice because in old versions of like Webpack, or if you're doing this in vanilla JavaScript, you would have to compile this separately. You would have to compile your style sheets and separately from your web application. Here, it's already enabled by default. So you can see here, if I change this to one of my favorite colors is like, I think it's like 3AD. I just really like that teal. So now all my color text for my app will be teal. So it gives you very easy ways to style your web application. And oftentimes I pull these into their own sheets. So I manage all the styling for my application in one sheet. In my template, I don't do that just because it gives me more freedom. If I just want to do a very simple web visualization, I can do that. But yeah, having SCSS enabled by default is very great. It allows you to get going on your style sheets without having to worry about any of that setup. So again, here in the app, this div contains the entire application in router view. And again, what this does is it opens up the router view index file, which is here in router. it goes in here and sets up all your routes. So anything in here, this component that I loaded in, it loads this in by default. So what that means is that whenever they load the web page, they already have all the content they need to do whatever they want to do. So it's not like when a user clicks on a button, it then has to go grab that new content. It's already loaded in the second that they go to the web page, which means that like it just creates a faster load time. If you don't manage it effectively, you can create much larger initial load times, but that also means that if you're loading in a lot of content, once they get past that initial load, everything else should be pretty seamless because it's already loaded into memory. So where a lot of the work is being done in this particular case is in the map.vue here in views, and the other part of the work is being done by the store. So the store is something that got created, I would want to say like 3 or so years ago within the JavaScript web development community. And what the basic synopsis when you hear the word store, at least the way I understand it, is that it is essentially the question, if you go to a web developer and you ask them, do you know within your application, can you stop the application at any one point and have every variable saved and know what's going on in that application at any one point? And what that means is that, like in this case, all I'm doing here is loading in my data. And this is the only variable that I'm changing. And what that means is that like I can change this to different point data and everything else will render the exact same. So I change the data and everything else is being rendered based on the rules that we'll go into in the map view. And so we see this in React. Angular was a little late to the game. They use like services and factories. I know React is one of the first frameworks that formalized their store. Vue store and React store are very similar. And the way they work is that your state is essentially like your brain. It's like, these are the variables that you're going to instantiate across the entire application, and you want to be available across the entire application. And if you're familiar at all with like what closure means or scope, each one of these templates are scoped to themselves, meaning that variables you declare in one template are not available in other templates. And that is useful because it means that you can like change out namespaces. If I want to use variables like, in this case, I have variables for my access token and my zoom. Those are selectively scoped to my map view, but they're not available to the rest of the application, which means I can like keep things siloed and organized. But pieces within the store, like my data store here, I call my data, I commit it to this set data variable. You can see here, this takes in a state. So it takes in the state of the store, and then I set it to the data variable here. And here, I bind that data to my instance, like to my template. And that means like this allows me to manage that closure and that scope very effectively. In old versions of Angular and just like generally old versions of JavaScript, you would have to manage parent and child relationships between what data is being emitted and broadcasted between the two pieces of the templates. So like a parent would be able to pass down its variables to the child, and the child could emit data to the parent. But if this child needed to talk to a different child of a different parent, it became very messy. And if anyone's familiar with Angular, I go back to Angular because it's like a good example of where JavaScript used to be, was everyone's familiar with the word root scope. And root scope was this very terrible, very useful, but very abused piece of the Angular framework because it allowed developers to tie everything to a global variable. And doing that is useful if used correctly. When you abuse it and you tie everything to a global variable, you're essentially ballooning your memory for your browser. And so this allows me to effectively manage the state of my application and stop it at any one point and know exactly what's going on. Is that if I had data on like a timer, or I had data on new data, like an API endpoint being pumped into my application, I would do it in my store and then distribute that data to the templates that need it. And this is dependent on the principle of publisher subscribe. And it means that, when we subscribe to a magazine, at any one point in your magazine subscription, you can unsubscribe from that magazine and you won't get any more notifications unless the marketing team's really aggressive. But what that means is that like our templates and our data within our structure within our web applications should be able to unsubscribe from data and not get any more data coming to it. And that's really useful if you want to minimize how much data is being sent across your application and minimize the entire memory footprint. So here, if I don't call this tree data, it won't get the tree data from my store. And so this is essentially allowing it to say, whenever this data updates, go ahead and give me that data. Like get that data from this get data getter and attach it to my instance. So I can use that data within this template. And this is really nice because whenever we have a mutation change in our store, we can fire functions, we don't have to fire functions based on a timer or when we think the data is going to get to us. This already manages the asynchronous nature of data endpoints. Is that you don't know how long this Lower East Side tree data JSON is going to take to load into memory on anyone's device. But what this allows us to do is to create a publishing model here. I subscribe to the data whenever that data updates. So when that data in this case goes from an empty object to then being committed to as the data has been successfully received, I can fire off the functions I want to do. So it means once I get my subscription of data, I can fire off the functions and not deal with asynchronous problems, which can be really daunting if you don't have this way of managing that data flow successfully. So in this case, whenever I get my data, I'm like, all right, so I'll just go ahead and console log this data so people can see what it looks like. If you're not familiar with I mean, go ahead and change that text back to black. Otherwise, that's going to be a little hurtful on the eyes. By the way, my favorite off black is 3333. It's a nice one. It's not too stark on the eyes. So, but so you can see here, I got my data from my API call, and here I just have a bunch of objects, and these objects are the JSON objects of that tree data. So I have the geometry data here, and I also have some properties. And the properties in our case that we're visualizing is the tree diameter at breast height. So this is when the park census goes around to every tree in New York City and measures the tree diameter. This particular tree has a tree diameter of 9, I think it's in feet. So once this data is loaded into memory, if we go back to the store here, I'll go ahead and, so it gets loaded into memory and it uses a syntax called context. This context refers to the context of the store, and I commit it, and a commit goes to a mutation. Mutations in the Vuex store says, I'm taking a piece of data and changing it in some way. And once that change occurs, send that change to anyone who subscribed to that mutation. So in this case, it means like, hey, we have a new subscriber, we have new data in, send that new data to that subscriber. So here I take my state.data, which is this data variable here, and I set it to the new data that's coming into it. And what this does is, like, again, it sends that message across to anyone who subscribed to that data mutation to get new data. And in this case, when that data is updated, I say, all right, let's go ahead and create the data source. And this syntax that you're seeing here, this map.addSource, this is the Mapbox-GL library syntax. So this is how Mapbox allows you to manipulate the data going into their map tiles that we see on the map visualization. So I'm telling it this is a GeoJSON structure. And then here I just feed in the data. It's a feature collection. And here this .tree data .features is referring to this right here, this features array. So I'm giving it an array of all these objects that are geolocated to put onto the map. And this context is very confusing at times. In JavaScript, we have the scope of a function. And if you console log the keyword this, it will return to you the context of the scope of the function that you're calling within. And that changes based on whatever function you're calling within in differences. The same thing happens in self in Python. It also happens in .NET in different ways, the closure variables or the closure paradigm. So here, this is going to refer to the Vue instance. So we can see here, this right here is how Vue does all its work. And the really cool part about Vue, when I talk about Vue being a template that you slide in new pieces, the way it does that is by doing something called a reactive state. And it does that using this really cool word that I like called the shadow DOM. And that shadow DOM means that it has these things attached to every single property. So if we look at my tree data here, I attached it to the Vue instance. And what it does for every single one of these properties, when I open it up, we see that here, it has these things called get geometry, set geometry, get properties, set properties. So imagine if we were making an interface, let's say in C#, we would have to create those getters and setters. So whenever we update one of these values of these objects, we set new data to it. The Vue instance does that for you. In some instances, you don't want to do that because it can create large amounts of like prototype pollution. But in this case, it's really useful. That means that if I change anything in the properties of this object, it will bubble that reaction up to the top level, and anything that is using that data will then get the change, which is a really cool part. And that's how it's called the shadow DOM. It's like behind the DOM, and anything that changes, it reacts to it and sends that data to where it needs to go based on who subscribed to that data. And this is all to say, like, it just allows it. This like takes so much of the work out of creating a visualization on on Mapbox, because it's doing all these manipulations that you would otherwise have to code by hand if you're doing this in vanilla JavaScript per se. So if we go back to the code, I set the tree data source, and this is just how Mapbox's syntax works: is it wants a source of the data, and then once I create my source, I say let's go ahead and add that data to the map. And here is when I'm doing the styling. So I'm saying, all right, give me that tree data source data, or give me that tree data source data, and I'm gonna create some circles. I'm gonna give it a unique ID. And here I get to do the styling. And I'm saying, give it the stroke color, give it the width of this. Here's the tree radius. This right here is where we're able to do manipulations on how things are styled very specifically. So these are like an interpolation stop. So I'm saying from any value that has a tree diameter of 0, give it a radius of 2, and this second value is going to be corresponding to the value that's going to be interpreted by the given property that you're styling. So let's say I want this to be 4 and 6 and 8, 12, and I increase everything by a factor of 2. Now everything on the map will just be that much bigger. So you can directly manipulate how things are styled based on the data that's being ingested at runtime, which is really cool. So this allows me to have very close control of how things are styled onto the interactive map. And so, yeah, we give it color and opacity, and this is all documented very well on the Mapbox documentation page. They have so many examples from the community. And so if you ever have questions about what's the possibilities of what can and cannot be styled, they have really great documentation on that. And one other piece that is somewhat unique to Vue is that you can see here in vanilla JavaScript, oftentimes you have an HTML page, you have your JavaScript page, and you have your CSS page. In Vue, you can see here, it's all tied into one page. So I can work just on the map view and have all my HTML. I have all the JavaScript that is affecting that HTML page. And then here I have all my CSS that I want to affect that page. And the cool part is that this is all scoped. Is that this means that this map variable will only apply to this page, which is nice because it allows me to like organize what's going on. And if I want to pull things out to global, you can do that too. Like on other products I have like a lot of these variables pulled out to their global classes. And the only thing that's in here is things that are very specifically going on to this template. And I set my left UI and I have my nice frosted glass CSS. So we get that cool little frosted glass feature for the sidebar. So this is something like this setup is very consistent about like where we see a lot of map visualizations. You do a visualization on the map, you have a title, subtitle, some descriptions, and here you can create all your UI to manipulate the data onto the map. So with that very that explanation, I'll open it up for any questions.
I think like this was for me like a crash course on Vue.js. Like it was amazing. So I was playing with Mapbox earlier, so you can also create like zoom visualization. Like if you have a particular zoom level, then the icons will appear. Can you do that here as well?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you can do it here as well. I'm trying to remember the syntax, but it's very close to this same syntax, but you can set it by zoom. So you can change the color based on the zoom. A good example of that is I can pull up here. I think this should be it, what I'm thinking of. That's on match, that's on radius. Oh yeah, this one does it based on zoom. So this is saying make circles larger as the user zooms from zoom 12 to zoom 22. So this is making the circles bigger as the user gets closer to the screen. So let's just go ahead and copy this. And let's say I want to change the color based on the zoom. So I'll just copy that syntax here. So doing live coding is never a good idea, but let's see how this works. I'll just change this out. Let's get rid of that. So let's say at Zoom 12, I want the circles to be green. And at Zoom 22, I want them to be my favorite off black. Let's see if this works. Live coding is never a good idea, but we'll see. So it compiled. Where's the app? So they're green. Let's see if they go black. Do I have any errors? No errors. Am I far enough down? Oh, there you go.
Oh, awesome.
Green, black, green, black. Live coding works. It's always dangerous. But
you risked it.
I guess we wanted to do that at a higher zoom. Let's say we went from 12 to 15. So there you go. So this is actually doing an interpolation. So it's interpolating between the green and the black we gave it. So you can change the color of it based on the zoom level of the user, which can be really useful if you're showing data, let's say at the census tract level, and then you want to show different data as they get farther down to like the census block level and then eventually the street level. So yeah, that is completely possible. You know, as you can see, it's pretty easy to instantiate.
I see. And like, I'm curious to know your thoughts. Like, if suppose we want to create like a participatory like design for urban scale project where we can ask like feedback from the user on the map. Like, what are your thoughts on ways we could create an interface which allows more collective design?
Sure. I think what I would, off the cuff, I would think of attaching tooltips to a given data feature and then attaching a form to that data feature to solicit feedback on whatever that is. So if it's on, you can imagine that especially on like rezonings or potentially proposals, like if you want to collect feedback, I think that the community would be much easier to connect what's going on. If they saw, hey, like this is a new building, I want to click on this building and solicit feedback for that building. That's how I would do it. And the tooltips for Mapbox are also very easy to create. Let's see here. I don't know if I want to try to do tooltips live, but that's how I would do it. I would attach it to yeah, you can see here that we can just, this is a pop-up, but maybe we want to do a tooltip. Any tooltips? Build a store locator. Oh, well, there we go. So this is how I would think about it, is take your data features and attach a tooltip to them. And maybe this is a form they can fill out to solicit feedback.
Got it. I see. And like you said earlier, you started with D3.js for data visualization. So have you like completely like switched to Mapbox, or do you still use D3?
So there's certain things, and I don't want to throw shade to Mike Bostock, who's one of my heroes for creating the D3 visualization library. It's more so is that D3 uses these concepts called anonymous functions. And those are just simplifying examples. The reason I say that they teach bad habits is that when you're creating code bases, like this right here is an anonymous function, where this dot notation is not consistent with any other like JavaScript conventions that you'll see. Like it's very hard to document, and like it's very easy to read D3 code, but it's very hard to document it and abstract it in a way sometimes. And I think so that was my very first code language I ever learned. I code everything in D3. As far as for visualizations and just use static, HTML and CSS. I would say like for visualizations to get things going on the fly, D3 is a great resource. The nice thing about like whether you're using Vue or React, there's I think it's Apex charts for Vue. There are so many wrappers that give you native support for these libraries that you're using that do so many great like for this, in this case, if I personally need to do a line chart, I won't use D3. I'll just use these already built out charts to do what I need to do because they're natively supported by Vue, or in this case, they also have React and Angular. So within these larger libraries, there's somewhat easier roads to go that require you to do less coding. And the best part is like less maintenance because these are supported by the developers who are creating them. And D3 offers more freedom. Like this is somewhat constrained to what you can visualize, but you can customize it where you need to, where I think D3 offers much more customization. But unfortunately, like I think for large scale JavaScript applications, it can potentially teach bad habits as you code out larger applications.
I see. And you said like you are interested in like data driven or data science driven policy making. Like, can you share some examples where people used it to implement a policy?
Sure. I would think one, let me see if I can remember the site. I think it's like NYC Park Analytics. They do some really cool visualization work. I hope this is the right link that I'm thinking of. This might be a student work. NYC Park Analytics, they map all the trees across New York City, which helps them understand where they want to potentially do new trees for the community. I just need to remember which link that they have, because they have some really cool, they have a really cool visualization platform for doing that. And I think close to what you're talking about too, is that they have a way to solicit feedback and comments. I just wish I can remember where it is. I think it's NYC Park Analytics. If anyone on the chat knows what this is like student work. So this is actually this is a screenshot of the platform I'm looking for. I think. But yeah, I would say that it offers us, we're seeing more and more data visualizations every single day to try to inform. Million walks in the park. Let's see what this is. I mean, just seeing where people are walking, where parks are, where trees are. Here, let me stop my share real quick. Yeah, I think the really great visualizations are ones that are very simple. Now more than ever, we're seeing, like when we watch the last election cycle or the COVID map tracking created by the New York Times, like the general population, I think, is getting more and more used to not just reading about data, they want to interact with it and then see it in real time. So I think if we think about that as like within the architectural industry, the general population is being trained to interact with visualizations and web visualizations like that, right? Like the saturation of smartphones has reached almost universal levels. Like everyone has access to these technologies. So we should be offering, especially for community engagement, I think is a really powerful platform for that.
And I know you explained it quite well, but I still want to clarify the difference between Vue, vanilla JavaScript, and React. So, is it right to say like because of the state and route framework you showed in the example, that makes it different from vanilla JavaScript, which has asynchronous? Here you are defining a like state, and when the state is achieved, like you perform other actions, and that makes Vue different.
Sure. I think what makes Vue different for me, and when we were at the time, it was at my last company where we were actually doing speed tests with React and Vue because we were about to make the change from Angular 1.2, which I think is officially deprecated now, thankfully. But I know a lot of companies are in the position of transitioning out of this, but anywho. So we were doing speed tests with Vue, and we had four developers testing it. And everyone showed that it was somewhat similar in speed as far as browser load speed, response, and we also timed how quickly each developer could get from 0 to an application started. And this was even before the Vue CLI got to where it is today. Like it was available then, but it wasn't as robust as it is now. And I think the piece that really made it for me is JSX, like the manipulation of the HTML DOM within the JavaScript. I think it works very well, and I don't think it's in better or worse in any way to Vue. But the Vue shadow DOM, how it is understood to me that it's just like this like piece layer behind the DOM that you're just changing. I change one object and it populates to wherever else I need. I think the reactive state of Vue is what attracted me to it as a developer. And it's just so easy to understand. Like the learning curves, I think, to learn Vue are shorter than it is to learn JSX and React.
Got it. And like, is it right to say, like, for example, either you pay like at the loading time to load all the functions, or you pay at the trigger time where you click and then load everything? So it is that a decision a web developer makes?
Sure. On Angular, right? I can specifically speak for Angular 1.2 for what a lot of the industry, just in general software engineering industry, is on. But Angular is like to progress to like Angular 9 or something like that. So it used to be, yeah, when you click on an about page from the home page, you would have to then go load that about page for the user. And when they left the about page and went back to home, you would lose that data. Like you would lose all the data that you had just loaded in. And in Vue, by using history mode, where it knows the pathway the user has taken, that you can just, once you load it once, it's already loaded everywhere. I think for map visualizations, for interactive visualizations, it can be a little tricky sometimes, just because sometimes you're loading a lot of data. Like if you're loading in, like most web applications that we go to, like let's say Instagram or Twitter, they're not loading that much data, right? Like it's text data, and it's probably compressed very beautifully in the data structure. But if we're loading in like gigantic GeoJSONs or shapefiles, or in our cases, 3D geometry, you have to be a little smarter about how you parse that data, and when you load and when you don't load, and how you destroy that data. So for the platform at KPF that we worked on called Scout, where we do 3D interactive visualizations using 3.js, when we're loading in, like there was parts that we were loading in entire city context, and I just had to be smart about how that data gets loaded in, when do I destroy it, and how do I manage the garbage disposal when users navigate throughout the site to make sure it's as fast as I can make it. So I think that answer depends heavily on how much data you're loading in. So at the end of the day, whether you're loading in initially or on page loads, that data still has to get loaded into the browser. So if it's 500 megabytes of data, somewhere along the line, you're going to have some kind of slowdown on response time.
I see. And when you say like it's loaded in the memory, is it on the client side on browser or server side?
Sure. So once in this case, right, when the user, I'll go back to my visualization so we can have something to talk to here. When the user, in this case, loads this web page in particular, once the load's initiated, this data is then transferred to the client computer. So this GeoJSON is existing on the client computer. And a good way to tell is, if you're ever curious as a developer, you can always go to sources, and you can see what's loaded into your browser. So somewhere in one of these folders, it's going to be loaded in. I can never remember. That's all your node modules. I should not open that one. So like you can see the source code in these folders. So here is actually cool because what I'm writing in my code is ESX or ES6 syntax, and Vue uses Babel to compile that down into JavaScript. I think it's like ES 2012. That just means that you can write higher level JavaScript and have it compiled down to what the browsers read. But yeah, all that data is loaded into the client side once they're initialized the load. I just don't know where in this folder structure it is. It's somewhere around here. Like that GeoJSON exists somewhere in here. Oh, actually, it's going to exist here, so we can watch it. It's going to come in here, so you can probably find where the GeoJSON is. So it's right here. So right here, this got loaded in pretty fast. Let's see, 15 milliseconds, I think. Let's see, how long did it take to load? I think this is only like, this is a pretty small amount of data. 32 milliseconds it took to load. And this is actually a really good place if you're developing large visualizations to track where your impacts are to see, what's bogging down my application is seeing how long these loads are taking. And this is like the total load time. I think most websites load in under a second. So it's kind of what you're competing with. When we're all used to loading something in our phones in a second, that's kind of what you're competing with, is less than a second, which is crazy to think about.
I see. And like, I'm just curious, like if one is developing also for iOS or Android.
Oh, I think you might have broken up there. I think you broke up there. You were asking about iOS and Android.
Yeah, like if one is developing for iOS or Android interface, what would you do differently?
Oh, so there's actually some really cool. So one, since I'm developing this for a web browser, this can open up on any web browser on iPhone or Android. So you don't have to do any special coding, which is really great because you only have to code it once. Granted, if you use React, or not React, but if you use native languages like Swift or the Android developer library for Android SDKs, you get a lot more features within the phone that are very unique. But like Vue has their own like Android React and iOS native libraries. Yeah, Vue native. So this allows you to write native Android code in Vue and it compiles down to Android native. So like the plugins that are available now more than ever is kind of crazy that you can just write regular JavaScript and have it get compiled down to be React native or Android native or iOS native. So it allows you to write cross-platform native mobile apps using JavaScript. So these are already built for you out of the box. Like you don't really have to do too much of like the interpretation between the two, which is great.
I see. I'm just worried like if the GeoJSON file is too big, then it might be very much on the end. Like,
Sure. So what in cases like that, we've dealt with that before, is that when the GeoJSON is too big, what you end up doing, and you'll see this for other websites, is that they'll be chunking this out. And what that means is that I will load a certain chunk of that GeoJSON first and allow everything to lazy load. So whenever they get there, they'll be loaded into the screen. But as long as you have something on the screen, users are usually like, okay, I have something to look at. And they're like, their brain kind of turns off of like waiting where they're interacting with something immediately. So I think a part of that is a technical problem where you have to process data very quickly on your server side to serve that over to the client. But another problem with that, or a part of that, is the UI UX design. You know, how do you make sure users have something immediately to play with while you're loading in other pieces of data? I think loading animations go very far too. And it's also fun to create loading animations. So I think those always go well when doing larger loads. I think the browser has a limit of like 2 gigabytes though. So you probably don't want to go close to that, I think. Especially if people have like 50 tabs open up, it's probably less.
I see. Okay, I didn't know about that concern. I'll definitely look into that later. But it's super interesting. Like you identify like few chunks of the data which you load and sequentially you do it. Uh, have you experimented like integrating like this data driven interface in like Rhino or Revit?
So actually, I think I think I actually used a piece of it. Like 2 years ago, I did a hackathon where we got latitude, longitude data back into Rhino, like GIS data. These map tiles, I've actually used, unfortunately, I can't show it here, but I've used these map tiles to create a web visualization for a client where they wanted to see their building, the analysis we did, and the story. So they like clicked around a story that was able to talk through the different phases and parts of the project, were really cool. And I think, you send this to a client rather than like a 3D model or PDF, it's going to be so impactful. Like they can show it to everyone else on their phone, on their desktop. And that part, I think it's really important as a developer to think through, one, do all your bug testing. So the thing I didn't show here is unit testing, and there's native unit testing support for Vue using Jest, where, you should be able to push to your GitHub, it runs your tests, and then you push to your server once it passes all your tests. That's super important before you send it to a client. But regardless, Mapbox has 3D aspects too. I don't have them here, but you can turn on 3D buildings here and have 3D buildings located within the Mapbox tiles, which is really cool.
I see. I'm curious to know, like, what were some challenges you faced in your like coding journey? Like, few highlights.
Sure. I think the jump between knowing how to get something working and like publishable that I knew worked like 80% of the time to making sure it works 100% of the time, which is a continuous challenge within software development. I think that just took a lot more diligence in like breaking down how these functions are talking to each other. Like I think about what it looks like to write an application that is foolproof in a way, and it's like I know it's going to work once it passes its tests. I know it's going to work. for what I designed it for. I think that jump has been hard, but the thing that's been really fun is like the community around software development. Like within architecture, we don't share all that much with each other, but within software development, we share everything, which has been really fun because like we've all learned from each other. So like all the communities around Mapbox, around D3, around Vue, there's so much support to find the answers you need very quickly, which allows you to like learn so quickly, and deploy code that's ready to go in front of a client or whoever.
I see. And like, what's your speculative vision for like what might be like the future of AEC tech?
I think we're seeing more and more data visualizations and platforms on the web where I'm curious in like the next 3 to 5 years, is that just going to be the normal? I think all of us being like a certain generation of people going into the field, all of us know Rhino. We learned Revit. We probably learned some AutoCAD. But what happens like when all the new generation of students come out knowing all these new technologies, and they'll be going to their firm saying we should be doing everything in the web browser, we should be designing exclusively on the web, whatever it is. I'm curious to see where that thread goes. I do wonder at a certain point, is it going to be like all these technologies are in an effort to better inform design and to make better decisions, right? Like these technologies are only as good as the decision we're trying to impact and inform. I think I'm curious to see what happens, like what decisions architectural firms and AEC tech want to inform. Like we're always trying to inform like better sustainable design, but like, I think there's a level even beyond that I'm curious what we're trying to inform as an industry.
So, like any piece of advice for students who are interested to learn software development?
Sure. I think the best piece I got is give yourself a project that has a defined endpoint. So whether it's like, all right, a lot of times we say, I want to create a portfolio, but portfolio can be fairly complex depending on how big your scope is. And I think if you want to learn a framework like React, and I would always advocate for Vue, but give yourself a product that has a defined endpoint so you know when you've reached it and you can evaluate how well you did, and then always perfect it over time. Like don't let the pursuit of perfection stop the progress that you're going to make along the way. So I think giving yourself like a real project that you're going to deploy out in some capacity, and working through all those challenges is always hard, but you just gotta push. There's no other way around it. You have to push past those challenges as you find them. You're gonna have a challenge on setting up your environment, or pushing to a cloud server, or just getting a dot to appear correctly on the screen. But I promise it will be worth it.
I see. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And if you may share, like what's coming next for you?
Sure. I think with my background and like my interest is with architecture, with technology, and now I'm finishing my master's this December, and master's of informatics. And I'm curious to combine all those in policy to see, where that can go. I think about, I was inspired and also kind of sad when I was younger and learned about Penn Station being torn down, and like architects were fighting tooth and nail to stop it. And that was the creation of the historic preservation legislation. I was like, architects should be fighting for these like better cities. We should be fighting for these inspiring buildings and places, and especially not necessarily fighting for like inspiring form, but inspiring form that also functions well to combat climate change. And so I think that ultimately rests in policy. And so that's where I'm curious to continue to investigate. A lot of my projects in school have focused on city policy about how machine learning can actually be used to impact and make an informed decision by like, I think a lot of times we start with technology and we see where it can fit in, but it's like, start with the decision. What are you trying to inform? How are you trying to contextualize that? What technologies can you bring to the table to try to help that, if at all? And sometimes problems are not technical problems, but if it is, find the technology that you need to do or you need to bring to the table, find the people that need to be in the same room and bring those all together to make the best decision possible. Especially within architecture, everything we do lasts a very long time. So I think trying to make those decisions a little bit more informed would be where I'm curious at.
I think that's super interesting. Like, I really like the way you think. And like, are there any books, conference, or events you think like were very impactful, or do you recommend to us?
Yeah, actually, there is I'm gonna make sure I get the author right. So there was a book, the first book I read that like got me onto this pathway was Greg Lynn, Animate Form, thinking about like the cities can be more than just these like static pieces. But the other book that this is actually on my website was this one by Sarah Williams, who's a native here in New York. Welcome to the World and How the Built Environment Shapes Our Lives. This got me thinking about like the buildings that we live within and the ones that we design within ultimately affect how we create new designs. So if we're in non-inspired buildings, we're always going to create more non-inspired buildings. And so like we need to break through that vicious cycle that's being created there. And my theory is that we can use technology to break through like that theoretical like vicious circle that we're going to keep designing the same things over and over again. And so, yeah, I think Animate Form was a big one. Peter Zumthor's Thinking Architecture. And then Sarah Williams, Welcome to Your World was another big one for me as well. And then Peter Sloterdijk was the theory that I based a lot of my pieces on. His bubbles, foams, and spheres was great.
Sujay has a question. Does Vue allow for pre-processing or cleaning of data, or does that need to be done outside of Vue and then brought into Vue?
Sure, you can do server-side rendering in any of the major. Again, I'll refer to the three major Angular, React, or Vue. You can do server-side rendering and pre-processing. When I handle large amounts of data, let's say I have 5 gigabytes of data I need to process, I will process that on my server because that is a reliable piece of hardware that I know is going to have X amount of CPUs or RAM, and then I will serve that up to the front end when it needs it. I think that you just want to make sure wherever you're doing the major processing that it's reliable, because you don't know what the client is going to load their data on. It could be a phone that has 100 tabs open for no reason, and they're loading in your visualization. So you want to make that package as small as possible. But it is possible to do server-side rendering with Vue. I might have lost you. I wonder if it's my internet.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh my, sorry. I was just saying, like, now I would like to ask some fun questions before I end the interview. So can you share your hobbies with us? Like, what are your hobbies?
My hobbies lately has been bike riding around New York City because I grew up in New Mexico, and I will always have love for my home, but the bike lanes weren't really that great. So biking around and playing music. I've been playing drums for about 15 years. So seeking out other musicians has been like my hobby lately. I want to find some good horn or guitars or anything really. I just want to find more musicians to play with. Has been the really fun part. That and Overwatch. Overwatch took over some of my time, like on the gaming side.
I see. That's cool. And what's your favorite public park in New York?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, Central Park is obviously a heartthrob for me, just because it has so many different uses in it. But I think close to me, well, closer, I should say, is I've been really liking Pier 26 because I bike to it daily. And it's a beautiful bike ride to get there along the west side of Manhattan. And it has so many different uses. Like you just see people using it in such different ways. Like there's volleyball, there's soccer, there's people working out, there's people just sitting down in leisure. I think it's just a really beautiful park, a beautiful use of public space.
Nice. And favorite place you have traveled and one which you want to travel?
Oh, I would say that what I'm looking forward to most is going back home during October in Albuquerque for a balloon fiesta. So Albuquerque has a unique condition where it has the East Mountains that push down a cold front, and then it has the river. So there's an international balloon fiesta every 2 weeks, or for 2 weeks in October, where the balloons start in the north end and they go in a big circle because of the cold front and the river pushing them in a big circle. So it's an international festival that they're going to be doing in person this year, which is exciting. So, walking around the city and seeing balloons up in the air, and the entire city smells like green chili because that's what everyone's roasting in the fall. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most for travel. go back home and see the balloons in the sky.
I see. And like favorite place which you have visited in the past,
Favorite place I've visited in the
or
past.
architecture city, anything? Yeah.
Uh, I think my favorite place to visit in the past is in the mountains away from architecture. I think the Grand Tetons, when I was backpacking, was my favorite place because it was just away from everything, just mountain lions and bears. That was a lot of fun. It was away from everything. Even Yellowstone was too much people and structures. I just wanted to be away from it all. I'm a huge backpacker, so that's where my favorite spot is.
I see. And last one is, what thing frustrates you the most in AEC?
Oh, that all of us engineers and like technical specialists know each other and we all work together, but we can't work together on other projects in a sense. Like hackathon, like AC hackathon is like our heart in a way. We all stay connected that way. But it's just interesting, like knowing so many people in our industry and it's just always growing and it's like magical. But like I just want to work on like a project with everyone in a sense. Like I know it sounds maybe idealistic, but it's like we all have such great skills. Let's just all work together and we can solve so many of these issues that probably all of us are facing independently. Within coding, everyone shares their information, but within AEC, we're all sometimes siloed a little bit.
Yeah, and I think like I also feel bad because like if when I was looking at every firm is developing their own generative design tool and like reinventing the wheel. Why not work together, find like a do an open source, or at least have one tool instead of like spending resources doing the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, I'm curious to where that thread will end. I can't opine to that, but yeah, I just wish I can work with everyone from AEC. It's just such talented individuals to learn from.
I see. All right. I think like this has been an amazing interview. Like I learned a lot about Vue.js, and
Yeah,
I look forward to tinker it and maybe develop some interface. So thanks a lot, Brandon, for sharing the whole and going through the code. It really helped us to understand Vue from implementation point of view, and also you shared about like advantages compared to other libraries. So I
yeah,
really enjoyed the whole session.
yeah. Happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday.
Yeah.